I'm a Christian who lives in Germany. Catastrophe has broken out. Hitler wishes for all the Jewish people in Germany to wipe out. There are no exceptions. If you're with a child, a newborn, old and frail, everybody goes. It's so awful to watch, heartbreaking really. I don't think anybody saw this coming. Life before the Holocaust. There are Jews living in every single country in Europe prior to the Holocaust. Eastern European Jews lived a separate minority within their culture. They spoke their own language, attended their own theaters, schools, and read their own books. Even though the somewhat younger generation began to adopt the modern ways of dressing and living and overall carrying themselves, the elders continued to dress traditionally. However, the Jews in Western Europe lived with less of the Yiddish culture. Jews were just like me, a normal person. Farmers, tailors, seamstresses, factory workers, accountants, doctors, teachers, business owners. You couldn't tell if you didn't ask. It's not like they had some sort of disease, and even then, what would urge you to wipe out an entire population? These people, these Jews, all became potential victims, and their lives changed forever. Life during the Holocaust. Hitler came into power on August 2nd of 1934, so here I am, hiding my dear friend and her family. Hiding her children is much less difficult because they're not required to carry around a form of identification, and they can easily blend in with the non-Jewish children. However, my friend and her family have not seen the outside of the annex since the war has begun, and it is planned to stay that way until it is a promised safe environment outdoors. I know many people who have completely changed their identity in hopes of being left out of the situation at hand. It's quite simple, but also a sign of weakness and fear. I cannot blame them. I would probably be doing the same if I were in their position. They change their name and convert to Christianity. Some have promised that the cover is just temporary, but others wonder if it'll ever end or happen again. The only concern I have is the possibility of her dear children having to grow up without a parent. I'm proud of my friend for staying positive. You may not think life could get any worse, but think again. She considers her family and herself blessed to have shelter over their heads and not living in an isolated part of the city, crammed with Jews. The living conditions were dirty and unhealthy, and at least I can provide them with at least 2 meals a day, whereas those poor Jews get very little, if any, food at all. After the Holocaust, the survivors had to rebuild their lives completely. Most of the Jewish survivors migrated to Europe and the United States to start living again. It has been quite some time since the war has ended. However, I hope this has taught a lesson to be accepting of everybody, no matter what religion they practice, what they look like, or where they come from. This is an event in history that is never going to be forgotten. It is important to be taught in schools because it sends such a strong message, as well as the fact it is very educational. Even though it is such an awful event that took place, it still has a resemblance in our country's history. Jews aren't offended. They simply state that it was an event in history that happened. It is simple as that. It may be over now, but we can only pray that it will never happen again. It is certainly not an easy subject to discuss and comes with promised tears. Anne Frank is probably the strongest person in history. I cannot tell myself that underneath everything, Hitler was a good man. I simply can't. When the subject is brought up, I think of a little girl named Anne. She became quite famous after the war was over. Her diary is found and explained how she really felt. She wasn't always as happy as she seemed. She was upset, scared, and nervous, but never let that show. She wrote that it would only make things worse and the situation would be harder to handle than it already was. I can, however, praise Anne Frank for seeing the positive side to every situation. She may not be with us now, but she is certainly in my heart.